All right, good evening. My name is Annie Russo, and on behalf of the JPP Steering Committee, we welcome you to tonight's very important forum. We hope that hearing from the candidates tonight will help you decide who you want to be your next state representative in the newly configured 15th Suffolk District. The primary election will take place on Tuesday, September 6th, the day after Labor Day. Tonight, Spanish interpreting is available. To turn it on, click on the world icon at the bottom of the screen and select Spanish as the language. If you are in an app, on a phone or tablet, click on the three dots and select language in the menu. If you are on a web browser or a Chromebook, unfortunately, you cannot listen to the interpretation. We will also be using closed caption. We wish to thank tonight's interpreters, Melissa Lynch and Juan Savada. And this forum is being recorded and live streamed on Facebook. We ask the audience to be respectful when posting in chat. Please do not engage in harassing, discriminatory, and intimidating behavior that stifles debate and constructive dialogue. Before we begin, I want to tell you a little bit about Jamaica Plain Progressives. Since 2009, JPP has been working to build a progressive voice in our community and organizing for change in Boston, Massachusetts, and nationwide. We conduct candidate forums organized to support progressive candidates at all levels of government, from city council to president. In addition, we hold educational forums and advocate for progressive change in our state on issues such as criminal justice reform, equitable education, funding, safe communities for immigrants, progressive revenue, and transparency in government. We are the clipboard holders, door knockers, and question askers for progressive values in our community. Unfortunately, our scheduled moderator is unable to make it tonight. However, we have three fabulous moderators, JPP's own Cindy Lou and Melissa Beltran, and our friend and partner, Vanessa Snow from Mijente. Tonight, we have several co-sponsors who will take a few moments to tell you about their organizations. First up is Anthony Croson, second vice president of the Boston chapter of the NAACP. Anthony?
Thank you, Ann. And good evening, everyone. My name is Anthony Croson, second vice president of the NAACP Boston branch. And on behalf of the branch and our executive committee and a large group of very committed volunteers, we welcome you to the Candidates Forum for the 15th Suffolk State House District. We continue to thank JP Progressives for hosting this forum and others like it. Our moderators who facilitate transparency through these forums, and everyone who will tune in now or after. Elections are always important, not because they highlight the minds or just the minds and lives of candidates, but because we're talking about real issues that affect community members and Black and brown and those that are fighting for justice everywhere across our state and our city and our community. But it also helps when candidates have lenses of justice, lenses of those initiatives that they talk about. And that this time is really meant in some ways to highlight those gifted with those ideas, those who often are burdened with stewardship. But tonight we learn about our candidates in a real way. And there is no election more important than the one going on right now. We know in just a few months, we're going to have to hit the polls and make some decisions. And the hope is that tonight we gather some information that serves well at those polls. And to our candidates, thank you for joining the race. We intend to celebrate the accomplishments with you. We also commit to challenging when necessary to ensure that the needs of those in our community are being met. But we look forward to working alongside of you to see the change that we all need. I'll step back now and I'd like to turn it over to Vanessa to speak to us now. Vanessa?
All right. Good evening. My name is Vanessa Snow. I come as a member of Mijente, which is a national political home with local membership in Boston for progressive Latinx activists and organizers, as well as part of the Right to the City Vote Coalition, which is a citywide, multiracial, intergenerational coalition that looks to build electoral power that's aligned with the issues that our communities and our grassroots organizations work on year round. And I am a Hyde Park resident, but Jamaica Plain was my first neighborhood for many years. And so really happy to be able to participate with JP Progressives in this way as a moderator. Should I pass it to Cindy?
Yes, hi, my name is Cindy. I'm on the steering committee of JPP. We just wanted to first give you a really quick overview of the new 15th Suffolk District map. So if someone can pop that up on the screen, great. So I believe on the left, is that correct? Is the old map? I can't really see. Yes, and on the right-hand side is the new map. So you can see that it has shifted a pretty decent amount. So starting for the new map, starting in Jackson Square, our district now extends north to Roxbury Crossing along the Southwest Corridor, and then south in the opposite direction to Eggleston, and then along Columbus Ave to Dimick Health Center. And then again, if you're in Jackson Square, the district extends west to Hyde Square, parts of Mission Hill, and then runs south along Center Street with a carve out between Lockstead and Burroughs to include the Forbes building and some other low income housing units there as well. It includes part of the Arboretum and then runs down to the Forest Hills neighborhood, and then kind of meets up against the Franklin Park border on Morton Street. Now, if you look at the map, probably what's most obvious is that we lost Brookline, and as well as the Moss Hill neighborhood of JP. This district does kind of run through wards and precincts, and so that's something that if you're in this district, it's good just to take a look and see where you are. I think someone is going to put up a link. Yep, John has put up a link so that you can find out whether you're in this district. Oh, that's actually the second Suffolk. Someone could look for the 15th Suffolk House District map. That would be great. Excellent. So the demographics have shifted a bit. So it is now a majority BIPOC district, which is wonderful. So it is now 47% white, 23% Hispanic, 18.8% Black, 13.1% Asian, 1.6% Native, and 0.3% Pacific Islander. So that's our new district. Hopefully someone will pop up the new map on the chat pretty soon, but in the meantime, I'm just gonna turn it back over to Vanessa, who's gonna go over how this forum is gonna be run.
Sure. Can we introduce our third moderator, Melissa, who's a steering committee member for JP Progressives, before we start?
Thank you, Vanessa. Hi, my name is Melissa Beltran. I'm part of JPP's steering committee. I've been with this organization it's going to be a year now this summer. JP born and raised, and I look forward to hosting this forum tonight. Thank you for having me. Thank you again, Vanessa.
All right, so for our agenda tonight, we have a couple of different rounds. We're first going to ask candidates for a 2-minute introduction, followed with some in-depth questions, some of them being, they're in-depth questions that you'll be given 90 seconds to answer, followed by some closing statements for a minute. And then we're also going to have some rapid fire, which will be yes or no. And then we're going to rotate names, so it won't be the same order every time we answer the questions. You should be able to see on a blue screen there that's labeled timer. That's going to have your time limit. Please stick to that time. And then we'll be giving you a 10-second warning and a 5-second warning, and then we will use the mute button. Anything else? Oh, for the lightning round, we want to make sure that you're using the reaction. So it's the green check or the red X. Okay, so with that, let's get into our first question, Cindy.
Great, so let's get started. Each candidate will have, again, 2 minutes for their opening statement. And please make sure to include your top 3 policy priorities in your statement. So we will start with Richard Fierro.
All right. Hi. I want to thank the JP Progressives for hosting this forum and inviting me to participate today. My name is Richard Fierro. I am a student at Northeastern University studying public administration. I moved to Boston 5 years ago for school, and in that time, I have worked for Boston's 311 Constituent Services Office, the Governor's Operations Office, and the city's Elections Department. Although I am not originally from here, I have grown to love the city and beautiful Jamaica Plain, and I am proud to call myself a Bostonian. I've learned about the many challenges that people face every day here in the 15th Suffolk and throughout the state. I'm talking about the climate crisis, housing shortages, the opioid and addiction epidemics, the student loan and consumer debt crisis, inflation, and economic decline, amongst many more. These issues have been getting worse in time, and they compound together to create serious disharmony in our communities. I believe that states throughout the country have looked toward Massachusetts for policy solutions in the past. Now, we must create an example for the rest of the country and push comprehensive legislation for green energy and climate resilience, for addiction and recovery services, for housing stability, and for universal pre-K and tuition-free community college. As state representative, I will advocate for substantive policy solutions to effectively address these issues. I'll provide a voice for the next generation in our legislature with a vision to secure a strong future for all people in the Commonwealth. And within that, my top 3 policies would definitely be climate change, childcare and education, and affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Next, we'll hear from Roxanne Longoria.
Hello, everybody. Hi, everyone. My name is Roxanne Longoria. I am the daughter of a single mother and an immigrant father who was incarcerated for the majority of my childhood on racist cannabis charges that would not be prosecuted today. I used the systemic inequities my mother and I went through to inform my work as a child and foster care advocate, and then as the director of youth homelessness initiatives for the city of Boston. I am also one of the 1.8 million women who were pushed out of the workforce to become a full-time caregiver during the pandemic. I'm running for state representative because I know who is affected when systems fail, and I want to use my lived experience to be part of the solution. My experience in the Walsh administration showed me the limitations of working within a bureaucracy. There were many meetings where I was the only woman in the room, and I had to speak truth to power. While I was often able to persuade people in a moderate administration to support a progressive position, I saw how we need elected officials who understand firsthand the challenges facing our city and its residents. That's the background that I will bring to being a state representative. Mayor Wu and our new city council have a real opportunity to achieve progressive change, but they're going to need allies in the state house that still has many conservative members. I will build coalitions to help achieve the rent control, climate justice, transit funding, and the criminal legal system reform our city and state desperately need. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Sam Montano.
Hey folks, thank you everyone for being here. I'd also like to acknowledge the gun violence tragedy that happened in Texas briefly, and thank you all for showing up and also hold that space for a lot of the youth and folks who were hurt there. So thank you to JP Progressives, Mijente, the NAACP, and Right to the City Boston for hosting this forum. My name is Sam Montaño, and I'm a queer, non-binary Latina who uses she, they pronouns, and I'm running for state rep in the 15th Suffolk. My parents divorced when I was 11 years old. My dad, a veteran of Operation Desert Storm, was struggling with PTSD and self-medicating with alcohol and drugs. We had to sell our house, and my mom, sister, and I moved year after year to avoid rent increases and eviction. These experiences informed two priorities: housing and substance abuse and recovery with mental health investments. As someone who has experienced the fear of losing your home, moving yearly, and packing lighter and lighter every year, I get what it means to have the stability of a home. That's why we are planning to refile the rent stabilization bill currently in the House, written by Rep. Eligardu. We want to seal evictions, and we want to push for the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act and create better accountability measures for tenants so they can protect themselves when they're renting. We'll be creative with state-funded public housing and provide opportunities for home ownership through state-funded public housing. We'll move affordable housing through funding and approval pipelines much faster than they're going right now. Second is substance use and recovery. My dad eventually got sober and had been sober for 12 years. His union said we will support him through recovery and we will hold his job. Unions can do that for their members, and so can we. Folks don't thrive in recovery alone, and it takes a village and support. We need investments in mental health and recovery with resources to meet people where they are. For the last 8 years, I have been deeply engaged in JP, from advocating for and leading community process for affordable housing as an organizer with JPNDC, to working with Mildred C. Haley Youth and supporting them in their successful campaign for a youth center, and painting the unity mural that you see on 273 Center Street in response to the gun violence that happened. I testified on behalf of rent control and COVID. Just quickly, my last priority is environmental justice and holding space for communities of color as they navigate this quickly changing climate. Thank you.
Thank you. Now let's hear from Mary Ann Nelson. Oh, you're still on mute, Mary Ann.
Sorry. Thank you, JP Progressives and the other sponsors. I'm really happy to be here tonight and so you can get to know me and to meet the other candidates. I'm a long-term Boston resident. I was living in the South End in the Beacon Hill before moving to Mission Hill. I keep saying I'm the last person who moved to Mission Hill as a student who could afford to buy a house here. I moved here in 1985, my last year of law school. I've been, as a teenager, I decided I wanted to become an environmental lawyer. I achieved that goal in my early 30s. I practiced environmental law for several state government agencies, and I've also been a long-term volunteer with an environmental organization that has both national and local components. To avoid conflict with my work in the state on state environmental issues, I got involved with international conservation issues, and I actually became the first African-American director for this national environmental organization. I still volunteer with them, but mostly on local transportation issues. In the early 90s, when the organization was challenged to address environmental justice, this was a predominantly white organization. I was part of a team of staff and volunteers who developed a solution, an approach to this. So just briefly, why am I running? I'm a long-term Mission Hill resident. I'm involved with a lot of local Mission Hill organizations. I've done a lot. And honestly, I looked about 4 weeks ago, I looked to see who was running, and I thought, they need me. We need me. I'm the best person for this position, and I like running, and I have 3 priorities that I'll address at the end, my final comments.
Thank you, Mary. Now we will go into our open-ended questions. So these are 4 questions that will be 90 seconds each. And the question is, what is your approach to representing the interests of your constituents? Can you explain how your office would collaborate or co-govern with community groups? And can you share examples of grassroots or advocacy organizations that you'd like to work with in the State House? And we'll start with Mary Ann. You're muted.
I know, I keep trying to
Sorry.
mute, but I think collaboration is really important. And I think something that's happened over the last couple of years is more interaction between elected officials and local people around issues. I like to keep that up. You know, this is Boston, so every night some community group is having a meeting if we're not at a public meeting. And I want to get engaged with as many of the community groups as possible, especially around issues that concern the district and that people are concerned about. I think we've had a good example of our current state rep meeting with local organizations, trying to help solve local problems. I'd like to continue using that similar type of approach. People on Mission Hill know that I'm always in meetings, talking to people, trying to learn what they know and how we can use our shared knowledge to solve problems. And I think that's what I would do as a state rep, continue doing this. Just through the process of running for office, I've learned a great deal. I've talked to a number of residents, and I think this is how we move forward, through people exchanging ideas and coming up with solutions.
Thank you. Next is Sam.
Sure. So for me, I am a community organizer first and foremost. I think that we need to approach this through an inside-outside game. So on the inside, I am doing the organizing and advocacy with other elected officials, especially ones who are more hesitant to move forward. And then I'm also being completely transparent and organizing with folks on the outside as well. So that looks like me continuing to collaborate with community groups that I've already built relationships with, whether it's Right to the City, Boston Tenant Coalition, whether it's an organization that's doing truly affordable housing, whether it's organizations that are on the grounds like Planned Parenthood or Reproductive Equity Now, High Square Task Force, local organizations in Jamaica Plain that know and can respond to these issues. In addition, we also know that those groups don't also represent all of the constituents in the district, that there are folks who can't go out to these groups, who can't attend meetings, who can't be present. So part of my role, I think, is continuing to door knock and continuing to do that outreach on the ground to folks who are in the community, whether it's myself or these groups also hitting the doors and saying like, hey, here's what's going on. Here's other methods to communicate, making sure that we translate things, making sure that we have multiple languages available, making sure that we're able to phone call and connect with these folks that are having trouble connecting with us, because it's our job as a representative to reach out to our community and to make sure that we're having a really transparent dialogue, because nothing's going to move forward without that transparency. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Roxanne.
Thank you for the question. First, I'd say that I have a long history of speaking truth to power. So in my role as Director of Youth Homelessness Initiatives, I set up and founded a training institute that trained over 300 community service providers in Boston during the pandemic. Before that role, I was in the Boston Youth Service Network role, which supported 15 community-based organizations that served young people who didn't find success in traditional school systems across the city. So I would bring in my coalition building, my connections, and just strategic thinking to make sure that everybody's on the same page and collaborating with each other to move towards a goal together. I think some organizations in the district that I'm really interested in working with and have already started talking to are Justice for Housing, which is a really great organization that's looking at providing emergency housing for young people who have quarries. As the Director of Youth Homelessness Initiatives, this was a gap that was always present whenever young people were in emergency situations and you need to find them housing immediately that same night. But because of background, they weren't offered housing. So this is a point in an organization that I would really like to work with. And then I have sat on the board of ESAC in Jamaica Plain for 7 years now. And so I would continue to work with them to build out coalitions to make sure that I'm serving who needs to be served.
Can you spell out what ESAC stands for?
Sure. Well, they kind of cut it down now. So it's actually a GED plus.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
And then last, Richard.
Yeah, I think it's a really great question. I guess one of the best ways to really, serve the interests of the people is to just have conversations with them and talk to them constantly while you're representative. In the past, I worked as a 311 constituent service aide, where I was just answering phone calls all day, listening to the concerns of the people, and helping them in the best way I could. And with that, that understanding, I would employ that into work as a representative to make sure that I'm not doing things for me or if it's based on my own opinions. I want to serve the real interests of the community, right? By collecting that constituent data and having a proactive constituent services team to really listen into the concerns of the people and actively employ what they say into legislative plans that I create. I guess through that data of constituent concerns, I would then seek out different organizations in the district that align with those interests, that the people hold to heart, and I would work to pass legislation with those organizations. Some of the organizations I like in the area are Mass Vote. I really want to expand voting rights, especially the prepaid vote by mail systems, early voting systems, same-day registration. I think we need to do a lot more work to get people registered to vote. I also like the Emerald Necklace Conservancy to protect our public land and our parks. Thank you.
Great. So the next question is a two-parter, and it's kind of digging in a little bit more deeply as a follow-up to the first question. So the first part is, what 3 words would you use to describe your leadership or governing philosophy or style? And the second part is, give an example, and please be very concrete and specific, of where you've made an impact in your career. So we will start with Sam.
Sure. So 3 words I would use to describe my leadership style would be collaborative, probably humorous, and empowering. And I think that an example I can provide that really would provide a concrete example of that is, so when thinking about currently my role as director of organizing at Green Roots, which is an environmental justice organization, I now oversee 7 other organizers. And my role is to train them in organizing and how to do community outreach and how to build these relationships and how to push forward advocacy work. And it's a lot of work to communicate with several different types of people, right? So I've learned how to style flex so that I'm able to communicate with one person's mode of listening and understanding and another person's mode of listening and understanding. And then together we're able to take all of that and kind of create this understanding of how best to engage with the community and how best to move things forward in the community and how to respond to what we're hearing and how to be flexible and how to move that forward. So we were recently responding really quickly to some asbestos that was left right outside of Chelsea. And it's like, what do you do to respond quickly to a continued environmental racist action against your community? And it means that you get on the ground and you talk to people and you move forward and you have the skills already built in from these leadership development trainings that you have been doing to be able to act quickly. And I think that's probably one of the things I'm most proud of, is that we were able to act quickly.
Thank you. Next up, Roxanne.
Thank you. I would say that the 3 words to describe my leadership style or governing philosophy is equitable, inclusive, and impactful. And an example of where I've made an impact in my career was just most recently, or something that I'm very proud of, is during the pandemic, working within a more moderate institution to be able to push a progressive idea of giving young people who are experiencing homelessness during the pandemic direct cash transfers to support their basic needs. This was something that wasn't popular with everybody on the team, but just having to have those constant conversations about the state of emergency that we're in and how every other person received a stimulus check and how young people deserve agency. Agency to be able to make their own decisions of what's going to help them in the moment. And that's why a lot of my platform is based on youth and young adults, is to give them the just an extra footing to stand up and be empowered to use their voice and have their own autonomy to make their own decisions.
Thank you. Next up, Richard.
Yeah, I think this is a really great question again. I guess for me, I would start with transparency is one of my key core values, and it's really how I see myself carrying myself every day as a representative. I want to be completely honest and truthful in the way I'm thinking and in my actions. Even if it might be a dissenting or disagreeing idea, I plan to be open about it and to really make sure that we can have discussions, right? Whether it's in the legislature or in the community. It's really good to get everyone's opinions and voices out there, even if you may not agree with it. So that's where I see transparency playing a key role. And then also in terms of voting history, there's a key role there as well, to make sure I'm open with everybody about the way you vote and why you think the way you do. The second word is humility. I feel like everyone in a workplace, especially a representative, should be humble and carry themselves with a degree of humility. They can always improve upon their actions and upon themselves. We're continuously learning every day to improve ourselves, and people make mistakes because we're human, which leads me to my next word is humanity, right? Everyone's a real person with a name and a face. We all live our lives and we have feelings. So that's something to just be mindful of when representing the people in the 15th Suffolk and also the Commonwealth, and just in your day-to-day life. Thank you.
Now let's hear from Marianne.
Hi. 3 words. I think the first would be collaborative, because I like to work together with others to solve problems. And I also want to empower people to solve problems and to do things themselves. And the third, I said it twice already, is problem solving, is identifying the problem and solving it. And the recent activity that I could use this approach on is the community garden. The organization that I work for just opened last week. It started in 2015 when the neighborhood said we wanted to keep this lot as open space and allow housing to be developed on other city-owned lots. By working together collaboratively with my neighbors and later professional staff, we were able to design and build a garden, get it funded. Each step along the way, we had to solve problems. And then I think I empowered the other participants in the process to be part of the process and to feel like the garden is theirs. And I was just walking by it today and a few people stopped me and said how much they enjoy it. We can definitely work together to solve problems in the district. Yeah.
Thank you. So the third question in this round is, what is your opinion on increasing transparency in the state legislature through proposals as making all committee testimony and votes public and holding roll call votes to increase transparency at the State House? Which legislator do you think most exemplifies your approach to navigating change in a House that has a strong speaker dynamic? We'll start with Marianne.
Okay. It's kind of a difficult question because I haven't really been in the State House. I've been there, I've lobbied, but how it actually works is still, as a legislator, is different than how it works as a person, a taxpayer. But I'll tell you, of course, you can, make information available. Like one of the questions on this on the progressive questionnaire is, do you support making votes available? Yes, all of that stuff should be available, as well as the legislation. But I think the key thing that we need to bring is information and people together in order to create change. Legislation has to be, legislators need information to make good decisions. And I think by providing information to my fellow legislators, we would be able to change the strong speaker dynamic by more people asking for change or for certain legislation.
Thank you, Mary. Next is Sam Montaño.
Thanks, y'all. So I am very much in favor of increasing transparency at the State House, making all of the votes public, making committee votes public. I volunteer, if elected as your state rep, to publicize those so you don't have to go searching for them. They'll be on the website. I will send them out in newsletters, and I will volunteer to tell you anytime you text me how I voted. I also spoke briefly at the beginning about the work that we have to do playing an inside and outside organizing game. I think that transparency needs to be used in that way as well. So whenever we're working in coalition, we need to be transparent. And I promise to be that advocate and that state rep who is being transparent with the coalitions and who is letting you know what's going on and what are our barriers. We know that, a lot of times the reason legislation gets held up is because we're home, is that we're a statewide kind of legislative system where you need to pass things across the state to move them forward. And we aren't doing the grassroots organizing work across the state to move forward a lot of these policies. And so legislators who are, maybe in Central Mass or Western Mass aren't getting pushed to do the same kind of transparency measures from their grassroots constituents. So that's also work that I think we need to address to move this forward, because this can't just be something we do in a silo. This has to be something we do with the whole Commonwealth. And I think Rep. Elugardo is doing a great job of pushing the speaker and advocating for things that she thinks we need to move forward, while also building those relationships internally to do deep organizing and hopefully move people forward slowly in time.
Thank you. Roxanne?
Thank you. So I have worked in city government, and I know the gatekeeping and power hoarding that happens behind closed doors. I will be a champion for legislative transparency, and I will hold myself and other legislators accountable in making our votes public record. I think that this is a really important piece in making sure that we are being held accountable as well to our constituents. It's really important that we as legislators understand that we are not beholden to anybody inside the building, but that the reason that we are inside the building is because the constituents and voters gave us the opportunity to serve in that capacity. And so legislative transparency also to me means accountability. For a person or for somebody that I am looking up to or that I think they're doing great work, I'm actually pretty proud and impressed with Rep. China's work that she's been doing around criminal legal system reform, and also Liz Miranda's work in supporting that around those different works. So I think criminal legal system reform is something that very much impacts Black and Brown communities. It's something that I didn't originally have as a staple in my platform, but now I do. And so I'm looking forward to continuing to talk about that and to share with you all how I'm incorporating those very important measures into my platform as well.
Thank you. Everyone's doing great on time. And Richard.
Yes, I'd love to talk about legislative transparency. I align with a lot of what the other candidates have said in terms of legislative transparency. All votes should be made publicly available, accessible to the public. I also think that voting on different bills should be, tallied and tabulated, right? Every single bill should be tallied. It shouldn't just be that antiquated system of yays and nays. We need to build a more modern legislature. We need to let the public be able to see what everyone's working on. What are the current bills in place, or what's going through committee? What are the different committees working on? That all needs to be available to the public. Every step and every process in terms of how that bill becomes a eventual law needs to be tracked and made available. We need to have secret ballot voting for House leadership and committee leadership. We need to, I support creating like a legislative budget office so that legislatures are more informed in crafting their budget for a fiscal year. And I also want to let State House workers and legislative staff the right to unionize and for fair wages and benefits. Thank you.
All right, now for our issue-specific questions.
Okay, so as you all probably know, we're in the midst of yet another in a series of housing crises. We'd like to know what your priorities are for addressing this crisis and to prevent further displacement of residents in the 15th Suffolk District. So we'd like you to share your broader policy vision for implementing structural change through legislation at the state level. But we'd also like you to address specific and urgent housing matters in our district. Just for example, the Forbes Building, Washington Street Senior Housing Project, or something else that you'd like to speak on. So let's first hear from Richard.
Yes, affordable housing and access to, quality affordable housing is a deep issue in our communities and throughout the greater Boston area. I like some of the more current legislation that's been passed in the Zoning Act, right? Requiring all the MBTA communities to establish a multifamily zoning, right? Along every commuter rail and bus station in those 176 commuter rail cities. I feel like that's a great step, and it hits the nail on the head in terms of the real root of this issue, which for me, housing is really a supply issue, and there's a great disparity in terms of a lack of supply and a disproportionately high demand for housing here in Boston. So, we need those zoning incentives in place in all those cities, and also here in Boston. We need to build more multi-story, multi-family housing, at least 5 or 6 stories high in new developments. Just really ramp up that supply as much as we can. I also want to eliminate parking minimum restrictions on new developments for housing. Because a lot of residents don't own a car or don't need to own a car when we have public transportation and bikeways. So that's one way to do it too. And I also want to eliminate brokers' fees across the board for those rental units and ease the burden of those upfront rental costs, allowing people to move if they're in an unfavorable environment more easily. Thank you.
Thank you. Now let's hear from Marianne. Oh, could you please unmute, Marianne?
Sorry. Thank you. First, we need to support the people who are already providing affordable housing. And a lot of those are our seniors, long-term property owners who have been renting to people at affordable rates for a long time. We need to think about a state law that gives them a property tax relief. If you've been renting to someone for a long time for $1,000, you can't afford $12,000 a year in taxes. We need a state law that addresses that. Second, we need to look at who's buying, and in my neighborhood, it's investors. Mission Hill's being bought up by investors, and as well as other parts of Boston. So how can we intervene? I think we need to create ways to create more affordable home ownership and middle income ownership. Look at what laws we have now, how we can better support and utilize them, and create more local housing. I think legislatively, there's a need for rent stabilization. And as the city of Boston develops this, I think that would probably be one of my first priorities, is getting that passed so that people can have secure places to live. There's a lot of different components to consider in housing, and I'm willing to look at all of them and move them ahead.
Thank you. Now let's hear from Sam.
Oh, wow, housing. Let's go, you all. All right, so some things that we can talk about for housing are rent stabilization, first and foremost. We need to put a cap on that. Folks deserve the stability of knowing that their rent is not going to go up several hundreds of dollars every year. They need to be able to plan, and they need to be able to invest in their communities in that way. So we need rent stabilization. We need to provide opportunities for tenants to get the first right of refusal, tenant to opportunity to purchase act. We need to pass the housing and environmental revenue opportunity bill that's in the State House. It's been there for like a few cycles now, to get money for housing and environmental options, so that we're building houses that allow for electrification and for lower bills for folks who can't afford higher bills. We need to modernize those houses. We need to put deed restrictions when we are allowing folks to modernize houses with electricity, so that they're not displaced. I think something I've been talking about with friends is home ownership opportunities through state-funded public housing. So the BHA has all these random scattered site housing units. If we invest in them and then we put folks in there for state-funded public housing, which is much more accessible than federally funded public housing, we can create opportunities for home ownership in our state with a state mortgage, right? And we can use ITIN numbers so that everyone can have access to these housing opportunities. I think the other thing is, we can invest in creating less parking and transit, but that's also an equity issue because our transit system isn't running well. So we can't just say that people can bike or take the T, because that's not an accessible issue. We need to work on investing in those other things. And that's why we need payment in lieu of taxes to fund things. That's why we need the fair share amendment to fund things. And I could go on and on and on.
Thank you. And finally, let's hear from Roxanne.
Of course, it took me a while to find the mute button. So housing. This isn't political to me, it's personal. I've moved 2 times in the 10 years that I've lived in Jamaica Plain. I understand the fear and the shame of housing instability, especially when you're a provider. And I know what it's like to move out in 1 month because your landlord raised your rents $1,000 from 1 month to the next. It's because of those lived experiences that I would be a champion for housing equity. We need rent control, and we need rent control now. Too many families are being pushed out of Jamaica Plain. Lack of affordable housing leads to income inequality, increased homelessness, and damage to our economy. Here in Boston, what that means is young professionals leave. Too many people on Beacon Hill's only experience with landlords is being a landlord themselves or listening to landlord lobbyists. I'm a renter, and I understand the difficulties of buying here in the district. The pandemic left so many families vulnerable, and we need just cause eviction protections, we need stronger foreclosure protections, and we need anti-displacement zones. We need housing for workers, housing for single mothers, and housing for communities of color, but what we don't need is more housing for upper income professionals. And people experiencing homelessness also deserve to be treated with dignity. We should be extending our anti-discrimination protections to ensure that people experiencing homelessness have their rights protected as well. I would also be a strong champion of doubling the deeds excise tax and using those funds for more affordable housing and climate resiliency.
Thank you. So since everyone kind of was giving a broader vision, we'd like to give everyone 10 seconds to list projects in our district, the 15th Suffolk, where displacement is an urgent matter. So let's start with Richard.
I'd say in a lot of the communities in the South, and also along the train line in Washington Street and Columbus Ave in Roxbury, there's a lot of, it sounds crazy to say, but you guys might view me or see me as like part of the problem, as a gentrifier, right? Since I moved into the neighborhood here, only 3 years ago, but it's just the reality, and I want to serve to rectify a lot of the issues in the community.
Okay, now to Mary Ann, 10 seconds. Oh, you're still muted, Mary Ann.
Right. Can you just repeat the question, please? Because it's not in the chat.
Oh, sure, sorry. If you could just list projects in the district where you believe that displacement is an urgent matter, so within the 15th Suffolk.
Okay, I'm still learning most of the district. However, almost every owner occupied building on Mission Hill is at risk of urgent displacement. That's local, but I'm sure there's other areas too where it's a major issue.
Thank you. Now to Sam.
Sure, quickly. So I worked on the 3371 Washington Street project. I ran the community process for that, where the senior housing was going to be. We know that there are 5-year plus waiting lists for seniors to get into that senior housing. There's also the Forbes building, which is actively going to lose its vouchers, and we need to, as a city state, push for that voucher to be longer and for that affordability to be in perpetuity. There's also the Poor Clare Sister Nun project that we are advocating for more affordability in that project instead of just a typical on the market sale. And then there's also the folks who are just getting displaced actively when their landlord sells their triple decker, like friends I have who are getting displaced because they've had their house sold. Thank you.
And now to Roxanne.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I mentioned before that I have lived in 3 different areas of the district. So the first time was around Jackson Square above a bodega, which I really, really loved and had a great community. That was where my rent was increased to $1,000. And then over by Mark Street by the MSPCA, and then COVID hit, and so moved now to Pond Street. And I say that because there's so many different parts of the district, and in each different area of the district is a different feel, but in all areas of the district, people are experiencing displacement. I would say that I did see it more around the Jackson Square area. There was actually some tax things that were coming that I was trying to help some residents with because they were in fear of losing their house. And so I think it's everywhere, but
sorry, we had to put you on mute. Okay, so I'm gonna throw it over to Vanessa for the next question.
All right, our 5th question is, what policies would you pursue to address issues of racial equity? And we'll start with Roxanne.
oh, well, racial equity. So I am a victim of mass incarceration. My father spent the majority of my childhood incarcerated on racist cannabis charges that wouldn't be prosecuted today during the war on drugs. My early experience of family separation taught me that the political is also personal, and that policy always has direct life-altering impacts on real people, whether or not their voices were present at the policy table. I believe marijuana convictions should not be barriers to upward mobility. I would advocate for the expungement of low-level marijuana offenses from criminal records to mitigate the impact of the racist and classist war on drugs on Black and Brown people. I would support non-armed community-based response personnel to respond to emergency calls, and I would advocate to end qualified immunity for state, local, and correctional officers. Something else I would raise up is to raise the age of juvenile jurisdiction to include 18 and 19-year-olds, and amending the Massachusetts youth expungement law for nonviolent offenses as a measure of bringing us close to racial justice. Okay, so as a Latino woman and a daughter of immigrants, I've experienced firsthand the systems that are built against people of color, and I'm ready to dismantle them from within the State House. Thank you.
Okay, next we'll do Sam.
Thanks. So I think when I consider this question, there's obviously like policy issues that we can advocate for, right? Like the Massachusetts Public Bank to create equitable access to funding for Black and Brown folks who we know can't access funding, especially whether it's related to their poor credit, ability to access credit, any sort of like homeownership assets because of redlining, things like that. So I think that's a really strong policy issue we want to make as the Massachusetts Public Bank. Something else I think about is what do we do in our communities, especially around education? Are we creating hub schools? Are we equitably funding? We know that a lot of school funding comes from property taxes. What are we doing to make sure that we're investing deeply in BPS schools, and not just those 3 exam schools, but every single school across the BPS system, because that's how we create equity and that's how we help bridge gaps. The other thing that I'm considering when thinking about this is I moved to Boston 10 years ago and I served in City Year. I served at the McCormick Middle School and I was in a sheltered English immersion classroom. 3 of the young men that I met that one year have now all been victims of gun violence. And it's the thing where you pick up the paper and you see their name and you're like, I was with that kid every day and they are a victim of gun violence. And they're all young men of color. And that includes Gerard, who we lost in Mildred Haley Public Housing on Halloween night, right? These are all young men of color who are suffering from mental health struggles and who are passing that on to like the community around them. And so these proposals need to impact, racial equity lens needs to be on everything and every single thing we do. We need to be looking at every single policy through a racial equity lens. So for me, there's not just one policy. Everything has to be covered with a racial equity lens, because that is the lived reality of our political system. And that is the lived reality of everyone in this district.
Thank you. Mary Ann?
I'll have to agree with Sam that we do need to look at everything through a racial equity lens. As a Black person, I think about it all the time. Every day, every event, I'm looking at the equity issue. And I would bring that into looking at policy within the State House. I just jotted down a few things. One is the school system, schools. The schools need to be adequately funded. We need to end the receivership process in the state education law. Clearly, it's just a way to grab power and not to improve the schools. And Boston Public Schools should not be threatened with receivership. We need to simplify the process of reporting and other aspects that sap up all the time of educators, so they don't have time to educate our children. Second, we should look at the criminal justice and the prison system. I think given the large number of people of color incarcerated, we should do everything we can to improve it. There's many suggestions out there that we can take advantage of and get the state legislature to implement and pass. Third, I think we should use our budget process to promote racial justice and also to promote minority and women-owned businesses as contractors and providers of services to government. We can write that into all the budget resolutions and the contract requirements for the different budget line items. There's much to do, employment, jobs, crime, that all should be considered.
Thank you, Mary Ann. And last, Richard?
Yep, I agree with a lot that has been said by the other candidates. I guess, one cornerstone of that being, racial equity and racial injustice touches every facet of our lives, and all the different issue points compound together to create, miserable situations. Some policies that I support would be, definitely using the Student Opportunity Act funding and additional like fair share amendment funding to really fund those public schools that need it the most. English language learners, low-income families, especially in special needs students, really need the support and the programs in those public schools. I'm also big on different tax reform policies. I want to increase the maximum rental deduction from $3,000 to $6,000. I also want to I want that standard income tax deduction to be raised to $20,000, maybe even higher if we can convince the legislature to do something like that. I just feel like, if you're making $20,000 a year, maybe for mixed households, it could be around $40,000. It shouldn't be paying any income taxes. 25%. I want to increase access to public transportation with a reduced fare for low-income families and households. I also want to provide a public fund for tuition-free community college and other vocational and tech programs to increase that opportunity for post-secondary education. And we also need more youth summer work programs, matching public schools with the government entities and other nonprofits to have these students work during the summer, give them more activities to do. Thank you.
All right. Next question is about climate change. What do you see as the pandemic? What do you see as the primary challenges of recovering from the pandemic, and what steps will you take to address these? First person is Marianne.
Recovering from the pandemic requires a multi-pronged approach. People are still being economically impacted by this. What can we do to help them? I mean, we have to support our small businesses. We have to help employers employ more people. We need people, we need help. We need to have a plan to address the long-term COVID that many people are experiencing. I still know people who are on supplemental oxygen or permanently disabled from as a result of having COVID. So we need to think, what can we do to support them? The government the state legislature, the state is experiencing a surplus at the moment. That money could be used towards addressing people who are directly affected by the COVID epidemic, who haven't had the opportunity to recover. I think supporting a lot of people are being affected by the inflationary impact of food and other expenses. So I think providing support for people to have access to food and other resources they need to meet their daily life might be important for the next year or two. And I need to think, I did have to think of some other things, but I think we also need to keep up our COVID protocols to prevent a second or fourth wave of the pandemic coming through. And the state should support those.
Next is Sam.
Thanks. So I think first is just acknowledging the huge loss of life that we've all experienced. We've lost 1 million people, right? The more probably, considering that, not everyone who passed away actually was diagnosed with COVID. They it was like multiple morbidities or something, right? So acknowledging the loss of life. The second is that there's been a huge loss of income for folks across the board. We know that, as mentioned earlier, that a lot of folks who are women had to become caretakers or had to put their career on hold. So we need to be able to close those income gaps. For Black and brown folks, those income gaps are even greater. So how are we closing those gaps? Whether we're looking at incredibly innovative policies like universal basic income to provide people with opportunities to have cash assistance now when they need it, if they're low income, whether we're looking at making priorities for communities that typically haven't been engaged. So like, are we using some of this American Rescue Plan money to fund minority and women business entrepreneurs as they're trying to get their feet going, as they're trying to recover? Are we also making sure that we are helping keep people housed? Do we need to revisit our eviction moratoriums? Do we need to revisit the emergency rental assistance that we've been giving out to people? I think those need to be boosted up as well, and we need to continue to support people through these next few years. Same for mental health. I think that we need an influx of mental health providers, and we need to be supporting folks who are going into that career path. Same for nursing, same for doctors. Those are career paths that we need to enforce and cover some of the debt to get more people involved.
Thank you. Richard.
Yeah, I'd say, there's a lot that we can learn from this pandemic we've gone through and are still going through today. Right now, I think the challenges are multi-pronged, right? You have record inflation and, stagnant wages, and things are not getting any better. These are all affected in part due to COVID, but also the supply chain shocks and, different macro trends in our economy, the global economy. Now we're seeing, the disruption in essential needs like baby formula, which is, really abysmal that this is a problem we're having. It's very maddening. So I think a big part of it is the state legislature needs to request and really get more funding and support from the federal government. Even though we might think, oh, we need to do all this ourselves, and we definitely need more support. I know we have a lot of leftover funds from the American Rescue Act already, and all that money can be dispersed. But to get through this and what I believe will only become a worse economic condition across the board in the next, for the next year, couple of years, we're definitely gonna need some more federal money coming our way so that we can boost our economy, to fund healthcare workers and nurses, fund small businesses, provide technical and opportunity grants for entrepreneurs to help them with their first-time starting costs and operating costs. We need to fund and support small landlords so that they don't sell all their housing to big financial equity firms. And that's just how I see it now. Thank you.
Thank you. And Roxanne.
Thank you. Working class families were hit the hardest during the pandemic, and income inequality continues to be on the rise. I would be a champion for wealth redistribution to vulnerable communities and neighborhoods that were the most impacted during the pandemic. I think this is an opportunity for us to look at pilot reform and to lift up that wealthy institutions should be better neighbors and they should be investing in our communities. I think I would also make sure that I'm restoring funding to small business technical assistance program and being intentional about supporting BIPOC business owners, supporting participatory budgeting. I think it's also really important for us to criminalize wage theft and reject setting a lower youth minimum wage. I know that this comes from my advocacy for young people, but if they're working the same amount of hours as we're working, they shouldn't be having another wage. And so these are some of the things specifically that I would do around revenue and taxation and wealth. But as other folks on the call have said too, this really needs to be more of like a wraparound and a holistic approach, because it just can't be about money. It also needs to be about mental health services. There's been so much trauma that has happened. I'm sure there's been so many people who have lost somebody and who haven't processed that grief. There's people who are forced to go back to the workforce or forced to leave the workforce that are dealing with transitions that, you know, they weren't expecting to be dealing with at this age. So I think being open and honest and a compassionate and accessible government is the best way to be able to provide those services for folks.
Thank you. And we have one last question before we go into the rapid fire. Cindy.
Great. So this is it. Take a deep breath. So the last question for the long form is, what is your top policy proposal to address climate change and environmental justice? And please be specific. First up is Sam.
The top one. There are many parts. I think that the one of the most impactful ones that can really have an impact on our community in Jamaica Plain would be allowing municipalities to enforce electrification of buildings. And the two part is allowing for us to opt into that as a municipality. So we have to do the home rule petition, but then also making sure that we're taking older buildings that are emitting lots of things that hurt air quality, like the schools, like the Hafen Refer Brewery, which is probably like contributing to pollution, to be upgraded. So it's also plays into Michelle Wu's Green New Deal plan for BPS schools, because those would also be impacted by the electrification and the building upgrades. I think that we also need to put in deed restrictions to these things so that we aren't displacing folks, and so that landlords who are making these modifications are keeping a stable rent moving forward. And that's like a two-part approach as well. It also will increase or will decrease bills for folks. I currently am in a building that has a $30 a month electrical bill, but I know folks are paying $600 a month for an electrical bill in JP. It's ridiculous, this discrepancy. So I think that this will move folks forward in having more accessible bills. Will make their house more energy efficient, and then it will also help contribute to us cutting down on emissions from buildings across the board.
Thank you. Next, Roxanne.
I was still stuck on the $30 electric bill. I was like, oh, my heart. Okay. We cannot allow the rest of Boston to become the seaport. We must prioritize climate action over special interests and corporate profit. We have a major opportunity with a progressive mayor and a progressive city council to make bold progressive change, but we need allies in the State House. I'm ready to be one of those progressive champions and allies to Mayor Wu and for her Green New Deal. As we grow the green economy, we have to work with state and federal agencies to find creative ways to finance deep energy retrofits of all existing buildings, including making sure that they are powered by 100% renewable energy. I would support legislation to transition to and accelerate the conversion of the electric grid to 100% renewables, expanding the existing community choice energy program, and advocating for improvements in the Mass Saves program. Whenever I think about JP, green space is what makes JP JP. And so I think we should focus on something that we can solve, which is getting cars off the roads. Free transit is a critical way of lowering greenhouse emissions. And as someone without a car, I rely on public transportation to get throughout the city. We need more elected officials who don't just support reliable transit, but actually write it themselves. Washington really isn't acting with the urgency that we need around climate justice. And so we need to decarbonize and build bike lanes so that cyclists feel safe on our road. Bike lanes are a part of having a people-friendly city. And right now we have a car-friendly city.
Thank you. Now for Richard, top policy proposal, so you can go in depth.
Sure. You know, climate change, I have many policies, but I'll try to focus on just the primary one here. We know that climate change is very well an existential threat to all of humanity and our survivability as a species. You know, in the coming years, things are going to get very messy unless, you know, we work together with not only our state here, but, you know, the whole region of New England needs to work together, the whole country, and then expand throughout the whole globe. So we can't do it alone. But in Massachusetts, the role that I think we can play is we just need to wean off of our natural gas imports. We ended up replacing coal and petroleum-fired power plants with natural gas-fired power plants. 70% of our electrical energy in the state is produced by natural gas-fired power plants, and all of that natural gas is imported from other states and in Canada, right? None of that's actually, dug up or extracted here in Massachusetts. So, a big part of this is we need to replace those natural gas fired plants with other forms of energy. I want to maximize our capabilities in wind and solar, especially as offshore wind farms. And I also want to explore the potential to bring back a nuclear power plant for Massachusetts and to encourage our neighboring states to do the same thing and to produce tremendous amounts of sustainable energy for the region. And I can rattle on about climate change, but it ends up just being, we need to secure a better mix in our energy portfolio to wean off the natural gas. Thank you.
Thank you. And now to Marianne.
I think one of the big,
Heading to closing soon.
okay, so I think one of the big things we need to do is make it easier for people to reduce their own energy consumption in their homes. And that includes subsidizing people's conversion to renewable energy, solar, geothermal, making it attractive. And for low-income people and people of color, they often, who are homeowners, they need assistance. They just don't have the background and the access to resources that many of the white people who have done similar things to their homes. So that's a state program we could do and have almost immediate effect. Someone was telling me today that in order to get solar panels, he needed to submit a plot plan for his property, which is really, I'm not sure where that's coming from, but if there's impediments to people really addressing conservation and energy conservation on their properties, then we should look at those and remove them. I also think we should encourage landlords to do these things for their tenants. Lots of people of color are renters in Boston, and there's no interest on the part of their landlord to improve the energy efficiency and their climate impact. So we need to set up a program that allows tenants to work with owners to achieve these things. I don't know if deed restrictions are the way to go, but some long-term commitment in exchange for the investment that the public's making would be a reasonable thing to do. I also think having free MBTA.
I'm so sorry, Marianne, we had to mute you. Thank you. So that's it for the long questions. We're gonna shake up the whole thing and move into the lightning round now. So I'm gonna pass it to Melissa.
Amazing. Thank you, Cindy. So right now we're going to go into the lightning rounds where each candidate is going to press. If you go down to your reactions on the dashboard of Zoom, you can find a green check mark and a red X. If everybody wants to just check to see, as Vanessa is showing, make sure it works on there. Great. Thank you, Sam. And so we're going to wait until each question is completed and provide the prompt to display the reactions. We want to make sure that everyone has equal amount of time to react to the question. And we will be asking issues where we have found contrast based on the responses to the Progressive Mass questionnaire, or issues that are top priorities for hosting organizations. And so we're going to dive right in. And so the first question is, would you support providing municipalities with the authority to implement rent control. Yes or no? Green check for yes and red X for no. All right, so Roxanne responded with yes. Sam responded with yes. Marianne responded with yes. And I believe, Richard, you responded with no. Great. Next question. Eviction records create lasting stigma, are prone to error, and impair access to stable housing. Would you support legislation to seal eviction records so that both tenants and landlords can move on with their lives? Sorry, zero. All right. And so Sam responded yes. Roxanne responded yes. Marianne responded yes. And Richard also responded yes. Next question. Do you support legislation to enact a single-payer healthcare system in Massachusetts, which would guarantee health insurance as a right? Just to answer that. Please let me know if you need me to repeat a question. Amazing. And all candidates have responded yes. Next question. Do you support, and we're going to go on to the criminal justice section. Do you support eliminating qualified immunity for state and local police and correctional officers so that individuals whose constitutional rights are violated can have their fair day in court? And in this question, once again, all candidates responded yes. Next question. Would you support raising the age of criminal majority from 18 to 21, in line with research that shows that young offenders served by a juvenile system are much less likely to reoffend and more likely to successfully transition to adulthood? Marianne responds yes. Sam responds yes. Roxanne's response is yes. And Richard's response is no. Following question. Would you support the legalization of safe consumption sites as a harm reduction approach to addressing the opioid epidemic? Richard, Roxanne, and Sam responded yes. Marianne responded no. I'm sorry, I skipped a question in our healthcare system group, so I'm just going to circle back and ask a healthcare question. Do you support requiring health insurance plans to cover all pregnancy care, including abortion care, without any kind of cost sharing? All candidates responded yes to this question. Thank you. We're going to go back to our criminal justice section. Next question is, do you support the Safe Communities Act, which limit local and state police collaboration with federal immigration agents, bars law enforcement and court personnel from inquiring about immigration status, and ensures due process protections? Richard, Roxanne, and Sam respond yes. Marianne responds is no. We are going to follow up with the education/youth section. Do you support the Common Start Coalition's proposal to establish a robust system of high quality, affordable early education and care for children for birth through age 5, as well as after and out of school time for children ages 5 through 12 and for children with special needs through ages 15? All candidates respond yes. Next question. Do you support a home rule petition for an elected school committee in Boston? All candidates respond yes. Would you support ending the practice of state receivership that result in a state-appointed receiver assuming the powers of a superintendent or democratically elected school committee? We know this is an immediate threat for Boston Public Schools. All candidates respond yes. Do you support granting in-state tuition and financial aid to undocumented students? Marianne, Sam, Roxanne, and Richard all respond yes. Would you support legislation to enable municipalities to expand the franchise to 16 and 17-year-olds for local elections? Marianne's response is no. Sam's response is yes. Roxanne and Richard's response is both yes. So we are going to continue on to moving on to the economy and ballot initiative questions. First question is, do you support the Fair Share ballot initiative that would impose a 4% tax on incomes over $1 million, producing billions of dollars in revenue to fund education and transportation? And all candidates respond yes. Next question. Do you oppose the November 2022 ballot initiative backed by Uber and Lyft to rewrite current state labor laws that exclude hundreds of thousands of workers from fundamental rights and protections? Yes or no?
You're asking if we oppose it?
Yes, do you oppose the November 22 ballot initiative that that supports the Uber and Lyft rewrite current state labor law? And all candidates answer yes. And second to last question, do you support enabling cities and towns to require large tax-exempt, not-for-profit institutions, examples as with property valued at or above $15 million, to make payments in lieu of tax to the municipality equal to 25% of the amount that would be paid if they were not exempt? Oh, I'm full. And all candidates' response is yes. And last question, Do you support dramatically expanding free public transportation in Massachusetts? Mary, Sam, and Roxanne respond is yes. Richard response is no. Thank you again for your participation, and I'm going to turn it over to Cindy.
Great, thanks. We're in the home stretch. So now we'd like to invite each of the candidates to give a closing statement. We're going to ask you to limit that to 60 seconds. And we will start with Mary Ann.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting this. This is going to be a continual process of learning what are the issues and what the best way to resolve them for me. And I'm real interested in hearing what other people have to say about the things that we discussed tonight and what your ideas are for addressing them, because I think it's the only way that we'll definitely get to solutions. I was asked what my 3 legislative priorities were, and I didn't mention them. I think my first priority is to enact the legislation that the city needs in order for us to keep Boston diverse and affordable. And I expect rent stabilization to be a priority. My second one is making sure the state budget adequately addresses education, natural resources, and environmental protection and transportation. My third is systemic change within the government, including restructuring of the MBTAs and RTAs to improve public transportation, changing the state education law, and eliminating receivership provisions and improving health coverage. I'm a longtime resident, and I really want to work with you and support you and be your rep.
Thank you. Next, let's hear from Sam.
So thank you everyone for this opportunity and for allowing us to come together to speak with you all. Like I said, first and foremost, I am a community organizer. I have deeply invested in this Jamaica Plain community, from the youth center in Mildred Haley that I advocated with them to help bring back, to the murals that we painted on the wall, to the High Square Task Force where I've mentored youth and served on the board, to the Southern Jamaica Plain Health Center where I received my health care, and I'm also on the community advisory board, to the neighborhood council that I chaired and ran for election on for 5 years, to the Pine Street Inn where I sat on the Impact Advisory Committee and advocated for more affordability, to the 3371 Washington Street project that I advocated for getting built but is currently in a lawsuit, to the Poor Clare Nuns building where we currently are advocating for more affordability, to the bike lanes that I ride my bike up and down, to the corridors that I walk my dog along. I am in Jamaica Plain to invest in this community, and I know that these connections that I've made with you all through my organizing and the people that I've met means that we will bring a strong united front to the State House to continue to organize both inside and outside to push these policies forward, because I know that without you all, these things aren't going to move. And so I appreciate your time, and I hope that you check out our website at sanfordboston.com. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Roxanne.
Thank you to the JP Progressives for hosting this forum, and thank you to everyone who tuned in to listen to the candidates. There are 4 progressive candidates in this election, and I think everyone saw that we agree on most of the issues. As a caregiver to an elderly parent, the daughter of a formerly incarcerated father, and a queer woman of color, I look forward to bringing my perspective to Beacon Hill and lifting up all of the voices that are too often shut out of power. What sets me apart from the other candidates is my experience fighting for progressive change inside a more moderate institution. I built coalitions and made allies to achieve progressive outcomes, such as putting cash in the hands of vulnerable populations during the COVID pandemic. And I didn't do that by compromising my values, but by speaking truth to power and by being a relentless advocate for change. And that's what we need at the Massachusetts State House. Thanks to Mayor Wu and our progressive city council, there's a real opportunity to finally change Boston so it works for every resident, not just the millionaires and the politically connected. On almost every issue, from rent control to free public transit to a municipal Green New Deal, there will need to be action on Beacon Hill, and I will work every day to make these progressive goals a reality.
Thank you. And finally, let's hear from Richard.
Yes. Firstly, I want to thank everyone for being here, and thank you for all the organizers here. This has been a great forum, and I've thoroughly enjoyed being able to speak in front of all of you. In closing, my core values are integrity, transparency, and accountability. I am not a fortune teller. I do not know everything, and I'm not an expert by any means. I am an average citizen who wants to do the right thing and create a stronger future for the district and for the Commonwealth. As a representative, I will continuously improve upon my policy understandings and learn more about the issues of the day to ensure I make the best decisions possible. I want to provide representation for all people in the district, especially those who feel abandoned by the system and have no voice. I want to increase the level of democracy in our legislature and to act as a conduit for the will of the people through my actions. I know the importance of proactive constituent service, to listen to the issues that the people bring to my attention, and to actively incorporate those concerns into my legislative goals. Thank you, and have a great night.
Thank you. That's it. I'm going to pass it to Krista now.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Thank you to our candidates, of course, and thank you to our partners, Right to the City Vote, Mijente, NAACP Boston Branch, and the Chinese Progressive Political Action. Thank you to our moderators, not only for being amazing moderators, but for doing it on the spur of the moment. So thank you specifically, Vanessa, Melissa, and Cindy. We very much appreciate you pulling this together and being so collected and professional with almost no notice. And thank you to everybody who came to hear the candidates speak, for being involved in this, civic process, for taking the time to spend a moment, spend your evening, making sure you understand what the options are before you. Just a little bit about JPP's next steps, our endorsement process. Next thing we'll do is we'll have a community conversation. Everybody is welcome to join us for that. We'll ask our members and community members to give feedback about not just this race, but the second Suffolk Senate race, Attorney General, Auditor, Lieutenant Governor, Governor. I think I'm missing something there, but all the races that we've got in play. That community conversation is going to be next week, a week from tonight specifically. Somebody has put the link in the chat there for you to register for that. We'll again be on Zoom. And so we'll sort of cover all those things. Your feedback will inform what the steering committee decides to recommend to our group. And then once we have that recommendation in place, we'll have our community vote, and that will be it for endorsement. We have all our endorsed candidates reach a 60% threshold. So that's what we're going to hold out for. And hopefully we'll be able to come to some consensus as a community. Once we have endorsed somebody, that's when we'll do our thing. We're out with the clipboards. We're knocking on the doors. As Annie reminded us, we are the clipboard holders. So once we have all that stuff in place, you'll be seeing us out in the community throughout the summer and into the fall. That's it. Again, thank you so much for spending your evening with us. We really appreciate you and everybody who takes the time to invest in their community in this way.